the EAMS logo, whatever.
Bueno, bienvenidos a esta nuestra novena sesión del Webinario Internacional de Educación Continua en Vía Aérea correspondiente al año 2022. Este webinario es desarrollado por el Programa de Anestesiología y Reanimación de la Universidad Diego Portales, cuyo director es el doctor Ricardo Latrobe. Este programa tiene como objeto lograr formar a un especialista capaz de ejercer la anestesiología en forma integral, entregando al paciente una atención acorde con la evolución de la especialidad, adaptándose a los cambios epidemiológicos y al desarrollo de la tecnología. Este webinario cuenta con el apoyo de la Sociedad Europea de Vía Aérea, EAMS, y también con el apoyo de la Sociedad Española de Anestesiología, Reanimación y Terapéutica del Dolor. La EAMS es una sociedad internacional que agrupa a la gran mayoría de los países europeos, es hermana de la sociedad inglesa, la DAS, y también de la sociedad americana, la SAM. La EAMS tiene representación en Latinoamérica a través de entidades llamadas Council, y existen en Argentina a cargo de la doctora Paula Chiesa, y en Chile me honro yo en dirigir. Los quiero invitar a hacerse socios de la EAMS. Hay un descuento especial para anestesiólogos y otros profesionales de países latinoamericanos, y con ello ustedes pueden obtener varios beneficios. Pueden ver ahí la suscripción online a la revista Transit Anesthesia and Critical Care, acceso preferencial a contactar speakers de renombre mundial, se organiza un curso, organizar estudios colaborativos en vía aérea coordinados por la EAMS. Hay una red de residentes que es muy entretenido poder unirse a estos jóvenes que se están formando. También hay posibilidades de formar un council, como lo hemos hecho en Argentina y en Chile, y representar a vuestros países ante la EAMS. Hay descuentos especiales en inscripción en eventos científicos, y también pueden recibir el llamado artículo del mes, que es se envía, algunos expertos eligen un artículo publicado en algún momento, especialmente los más recientes, que puedan ser de interés para vuestra educación continua. Este año tenemos una constelación de expertos. Aquí ustedes pueden ver, algunos de ellos ya han participado y otros están por participar. Hoy en día tenemos al doctor Massimiliano Sorbello de Italia, y el próximo año yo les comunicaré las novedades acerca de la otra constelación que vamos a tener para el año 2023. Aquí pueden ver el temario, el programa del webinario que hemos tenido durante todo el año, desde enero hasta ahora septiembre, y siempre les recalco que este webinario se transmite en directo a las 10 horas de Chile, y ustedes pueden confirmar su correspondencia horaria, que muchas veces cambia según las estaciones del año, en esa página web, que es una sugerencia que les aportamos. Contamos con la valiosísima colaboración de la empresa Traducciones Remotas, que en esta oportunidad hacen un gran despliegue para poder llevar a ustedes la traducción simultánea de la conferencia del doctor Sorbello al portugués y al inglés también, y al español. Él va a hablar nosotros en inglés, y vamos a traducirle su charla al portugués y al español. Así que muchas gracias, Traducciones Remotas. Los invitamos a participar activamente, pueden hacer preguntas, pueden hacer comentarios, aportar vivencias locales, pueden levantar la mano si quieren, para esa manito que hay en la herramienta abajo de la pantalla, que es propia de Zoom, y pueden pedir la palabra y les vamos a otorgar la palabra sin ninguna duda, o también pueden participar a través del chat, que también está habilitado para que ustedes puedan enviar saludos, comentarios, preguntas, etc. Quiero presentarles a continuación al doctor Massimiliano Sorbello. Él es originario de Catania, Italia. El doctor Sorbello es un anestesiólogo entusiasta de la vía aérea que trabaja en una gran universidad hospital en Catania, con impresionantes vistas entre el monte Etna, el mar Mediterráneo y siglos de historia. Ha estado trabajando en diferentes especialidades en el quirófano y también en la UCI. Estuvo también a cargo de los programas de enseñanza de manejo de la vía aérea en la Escuela de Posgrado en Anestesia y Cuidados Intensivos en la Universidad de Catania. Él es presidente del Grupo Nacional Italiano de Investigación de la Sociedad de Anestesia para el Manejo de la Vía Aérea. Es expresidente de la Sociedad Europea de Anestesia y Cuidados Intensivos, la ESAIC, miembro de la Fuerza de Trabajo de la ESAIC COVID-19 y miembro de enlace con la industria del directorio de la Institución Europea de Anestesiología Cardiotorácica, la EACTA. Es miembro también del grupo de trabajo del subcomité torácico de la EACTA y actualmente es presidente de la EAMS. Fue parte del grupo de trabajo de la ASA de la vía aérea difícil que elaboró las nuevas guías recientemente publicadas. También ha trabajado como miembro del grupo de trabajo del proyecto para el manejo universal de la vía aérea, el proyecto PUMA. También ha trabajado como ha sido ponente en numerosos congresos, talleres y reuniones científicas en Italia y en todo el mundo, donde disfruta reunirse con expertos internacionales en vía aérea, amigos y entusiastas con los que compartir conocimientos y experiencias. Es autor y coautor de más de 150 artículos científicos, libros, módulos de sitios web y plataformas de e-learning. Cuando no está trabajando o sentado frente a su Mac, al doctor Sorbello se lo puede encontrar viajando o buceando en lo profundo de su amado mar Mediterráneo, o también abrazando a su pequeña princesa Sofía. Muy linda tu sketch, Max. Quiero dejarlo con ustedes entonces al doctor Max Sorbello. Él trabaja en la Hacienda Hospitaliero Universitaria Policlínico San Marco en Catania, Italia, y nos viene a hablar de un tema muy interesante, que son los catéteres de vía aérea, que él nos va a mostrar cómo esta es una herramienta poderosa y que pareciera estar subutilizada. Antes de que darte la palabra, Max, quisiera que nos respondiéramos todos unas preguntas para a modo de introducción al tema. La primera pregunta que ustedes nos gustaría que nos respondieran es, comparando los estiletes y los introductores traqueales, ¿qué funciona mejor en términos de intubación traqueal exitosa en combinación con laringoscopios Macintosh y videolaringoscopios? Los estiletes, los introductores traqueales, ¿tienen igual rendimiento ambos o depende del laringoscopio utilizado? Así que por favor los invito a responder la pregunta en cuanto a su opinión acerca de qué funciona mejor en términos de lograr una intubación exitosa en combinación con cualquiera de los laringoscopios tradicionales, Macintosh o videolaringoscopios. Tenemos solo una respuesta. Parece que está un poco lenta la admisión. Una respuesta respondida. Nada más.
Es que no se ve la pregunta, Ricardo, en la pantalla. ¿Perdona? No se ve la pregunta en la pantalla.
La pregunta. ¿No se ve la pregunta, parece? Max, ¿tú ves la pregunta?
Yes, I could see it. And technically speaking, I believe the only answer you have is mine.
Ah, es la tuya. Yo creo que capaz que nadie...
But it's unfair, I know the answers.
Dice...
Es que no se ven, nada más se ven preguntas, pero no se ve la pregunta.
Yo creo que sí, qué raro.
Someone from the chat is writing that it disappeared very fast. Maybe you can post it again.
Sí, ahí está.
Yes, I see it.
¿Se ve, Juan Carlos? Desapareció, dice la pregunta. No sé por qué. ¿Se ve ahora?
Al parecer ahora se ve.
¿Se ve ahora?
Ya salió, Ricardo, ya.
Sí,
Yo creo que ya empezamos a responder, ya se vio.
perfecto. La voy a repetir comparando los estiletes y los introductores traqueales. ¿Qué funciona mejor en términos de intubación traqueal exitosa en combinación con laringoscopios Macintosh y laringoscopios? Los estiletes, introductores traqueales, igual rendimiento o depende del laringoscopio utilizado. Ahí también voy a... está como votación enviada, ya. Ahí están las respuestas. Tenemos Miramax, 45%, introductores traqueales, 36% estiletes, y un 18% dice que depende del laringoscopio utilizado. ¿Qué te parece?
May say not that bad, but I will try to make things clearer during my talk.
Es la idea de la pregunta. Vamos a la segunda, Gabrielita. La segunda pregunta es, ¿se ve? ¿Se ve la pregunta? ¿La pueden ver? Parece que sí. ¿Sí? Bueno,
Yes.
¿usaría un introductor traqueal como técnica estándar para la primera laringoscopía en pacientes de la sala de emergencias o la UCI? ¿Sí o no? Ahí esperamos. Ahí están las respuestas. Mira, casi paralelos, casi iguales, sí o no.
Yes, 50-50.
50-50. Exactamente. Muy bien, estupendo. Entonces yo voy a dejar de compartir mi pantalla para que el doctor Sorbello nos proyecte la suya y podamos comenzar el webinario. Les recomiendo que por favor mantengan sus micrófonos apagados para evitar que haya interrupciones por ruidos ambientales. De esta manera podemos tener una buena continuidad del webinario. Doctor Sorbello, la palabra es suya.
So first of all, let me thank my very good friend and colleague Ricardo for this invitation. I am honored to be here with you and also in a panel of international speakers. And I applaud to this initiative because I believe that we should never stop learning. So any opportunity for learning is always welcome. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you also for the organization and the translators, which I already realized work brilliantly. And I will take the next 45-50 minutes talking about tracheal introducers. That is a powerful tool, but underused. And I believe the title is perfect because from these first two questions, it's clear that they are underused. So I tried to put like the last slide, like a powerful tool, but correctly used. So I am an anesthesiologist, as you heard from this really kind presentation from Riccardo. I am working in Italy, to be precise, in the south of Italy. I'm actually the president of the European Highway Management Society, and I use this opportunity also to say hello to all of our members in the South of America and all around the world. We are happily cooperating. We will have our European conference next week, and it will be a lot of work to do with that. And also Riccardo has got some application for our POD. So let's cross fingers and let's move forward. Okay, I have a long series of conflict of interest, but no one of these will influence my talk. I can offer you the international point of view from the many highway societies that I've been working in. So from Italy, from the PUMA, the SA, the DAS, and this is a quite good point to have a larger view of the topic. I have a big conflict of interest because I was named Knight in the Order of Introducers by Giulio Frova. You can see this picture, which is dating 2004, if I'm not wrong. He's been my mentor. He's a very good friend. I consider him also kind of father. And he taught me how to use introducers, but also how to prepare risotto. And he was also eventually my witness during my wedding. So he's also responsible for Sofia some way. And this is probably my biggest conflict of interest. Let's go straight to the topic and let's introduce introducers. They are an interesting tool, and the very first application of a gum elastic bougie, what they call the gum elastic bougie, goes up to 1949. In that time, it was Sir Robert McIntosh, the one who invented the laryngoscope, how we know it today, which was working with a different blade, the Miller blade, the straight blade. And there was some concern because while you were performing laryngoscopy, the moment you were putting the tube in the laryngoscope, it was hiding the view of the vocal cords. For this reason, they were using a urinary catheter, which was eventually used to dilate the urinary tract, and adopted it as a guide so that they could see it passing vocal cords no matter if the tracheal tube was hiding them. So in 1949, the idea was for a guide, because it was straight-tipped, and the idea was for something that could help maintaining the view during laryngoscopy. There was no help from this tool to facilitate intubation. We had to wait a lot of time because only in 1973, the idea of the original guide from Sir Robert McIntosh was adopted by an English doctor, and it was Dr. Venn, who proposed a change in material, a change in design, and introduced the Ashman guide. The name Ashman comes from the company who was producing this introducer, but you know, this was UK. UK are very proud of their queen or king now and of their origins, so they some way called it friendly gum elastic bougie, which is in a certain sense a nonsense because it is not a bougie, so it is not a dilator. It is not gum because it's made out of polyester threads and resin, and it's not elastic because it's very soft and it can adapt. So its memory, its shape of memory is really poor. Nevertheless, it has been known and called for years gum elastic bougie in place of its original name, which is Venn guide or Ashman guide. This was the very first attempt to make a step forward the stylet. The shape of the tip, so-called coude, was designed to improve intubation success. So differently than the original idea from McIntosh, this was designed to add something when anesthesiologists were facing a difficult laryngoscopy. We had to wait until 1996 when Giulio Frova designed and invented his Frova introducer. There are many differences, but let me say that the tip is a different shape, is shorter. The material is completely different because it's intermediate density polyethylene. And this was the first introducer with two completely new characteristics. The first one was that this was disposable, while the Ashman guide was reusable, which was some way a limit, because in those years, it was 1996, there was a lot of pressure, there was a lot of worrying about the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, about prions. So there was a strong movement, especially in the UK, to shift from reusable devices to disposable devices. And the second feature of this device is that it is hollow. So as you can see here, Giulio is using a long straw to take the beer in his garden in Camogli, close to Genova. But the idea was to have a hollow conduit through which you could either deliver oxygen or retrieve entitled CO2 from the patient. It was indeed revolutionary, because this was the very first change after a 40 years history of guides and gum elastic bougie. I think it is very important to make a difference right now between these tools that we have for our management. So we have the stylet, which is something which is more or less as long as the tracheal tube. It's solid. It is designed to stiffen the tube, to address it, or maybe to tailor the shape of the tube. If we consider an highway catheter or an highway exchange catheter, it's long almost 3 times a tube, because it was designed to change tubes or to allow protected extubation. So it needs to be far more long than a than a tube stylet. Introducers stay in the middle because they are longer than a stylet. They are supposed to come out from the tube, but shorter than an highway exchange catheter. This is why we may use them for extubation or for tube exchange, but it could be a little bit tricky because they are not as long as an highway catheter. The function of an introducer is not the same of a stylet. A stylet is designed to help intubation. The gum elastic bougie, the introducer, adds something to intubation. So the first one is an intubation aid. The second one is an intubation adjunct, because it delivers a little bit more to improve intubation success. This has been largely debated a long time, and probably only in the last 5-6 years, we have enough evidence to say that tracheal introducers perform better than stylet. So I already gave you the correct answer for the very first questions, which is that you have a better first pass success when using tracheal introducers if compared with stylets. We will see why. The principle according to which a tracheal introducer works is the particular shape of the tip. This is particularly true for the Frova introducer. You don't know Giulio Frova, but he's a very, very meticulous person. He's very precise. And when he prepared his tracheal introducer, he spent a lot of time on 2 things. The first one was the material, because he wanted a good compromise with stiffness and memory. And the second one was the tip. He wanted that tip to stay perfectly inscribed in a square 2 centimeters per 2 centimeters. This is because in many catheters he could retrieve measurements, and he realized that the distance between the tip of epiglottis and the retinoids is normally less than 2 centimeters. And the second point is that the distance between the tip of epiglottis and the posterior hypopharynx is normally less than 2 centimeters. This means that if we succeed to place the tip of the tracheal of the Frova introducer below epiglottis and we push it forward, it will impact almost unavoidably retinoids. And so it will slip inside trachea. This was the object of a letter that we wrote together on anesthesia a couple of years ago, and we made out also this video. So you can see how the idea of the tip was to slip below epiglottis, impact the retinoids, and go up in trachea. This makes quite clear why when you use tracheal introducer, the Frova introducer particularly, with the laryngoscope, it has to be kept straight or gently curved. Otherwise, we lose the benefit of transforming a force that we apply linearly into a movement from the posterior to the anterior wall of the hypopharynx. So remember, we'll be back on this. If we use it with the Macintosh, it has to be straight or moderately gently bent. The second advantage of any introducer is negotiating its passage in the airway. So if we use a tube with a stylet, and if we take, for example, an 8 millimeters inner diameter tube, what we are moving inside the patient airway between vocal cords or whatever is the outer diameter of the tube, which is, for example, 13.4 millimeters for a standard tracheal tube. When you use an introducer, the advantage is that you can separate the tube and the tool that you use to negotiate the airway management. So independently on the outer diameter of the tube that you are using, what you're using inside the patient is a small catheter of around 5 millimeters diameter. So this is intrinsically an advantage, because when you use a styleted tube, you move something that for number 8 tube is almost 3 times bigger. This means that if you're moving in small space, if you're moving with particularly complex anatomy, it's much easier to negotiate the passage of the tracheal tube if you separate it from its outer diameter. So if you use a tracheal introducer. So let's now see what is happening in the world of introducers. And this is almost interesting. The first point is airway catheters are not the same. This was almost clear before. So we have adult or pediatric, we have introducers, we have stylets, we have guides, we have airway catheter or airway exchange catheters. They are not the same. Each of them has been designed for a purpose, and this is obvious. Second point, this is not less important, is that airway exchange catheters are not introducers. And this is what you can see very clearly from this picture. This is a section of the hypopharynx, so you see why the advantage of a coude tip or a curved tip or angled tip was designed to facilitate the passage between vocal cords. If you use an airway exchange catheter, which is straight and not tipped, you may not have the same benefit. So you may use a tracheal introducer for tube exchange, but you cannot use an airway catheter or a tube exchange catheter with the same benefit of an introducer. I think there's someone in the audience who left his microphone. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So when we talk about introducers in general, let me say that the Eschmann guide or Gamma-Lassi bougie was introduced in 1973. Since then, I told you the story of prions and Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease in UK. And let me say by mid-90s, with the Frova introducer, there was the very first attempt to switch from a disposable device to a from a reusable device to a single-use device. And so we have a lot of tracheal introducers, which are different for material, flexibility, shape memory, if they are hollow or not hollow, if they have a stylet inside, the length of the tip, and so on. The two landmarks, let me say, are represented by the Frova introducer, so polyethylene with low density, the tip inscribed in a 2 per 2 centimeter square, hollow. And the other reference is the Eschmann guide. The tip is more than 2 per 2. It's more coude than curved. It's not hollow and is made out of resin and polyester. So this is the standards. But since then, especially when thinking of environmental impact and about the Creutzfeldt-Jakob, there was a switch from reusable to disposable, and so many introducers came out. You can see here just a selection of them, but you can immediately see that the shape of the tip is not the same, Not all of them are hollow. Some of them are made out of PVC, some are made with Teflon, some are made with a low density polyethylene, some of them are with high density polyethylene, and so on. And there's been a lot of discussion on this, including the fakes. So also some devices which were produced, especially in the China region, independently on eventual patents, but trying to replicate something which was thought to be effective. But if you do it in a different material, if you don't reproduce specific features, you are not on the target. This has been object of discussion with one doctor from UK, is this guy here in the picture, Ilya Sodzovic. He comes from a big tradition because his mentors were Aaron Wilkes and Jan Peter Latto, so the persons who started writing the history of highway management in the UK. And believe it or not, our first contact was a fight. We were having some kind of discussion on anesthesia because we sent out a reply letter to this paper. Ilias at that time was considering the Frova introducer in this study, concluding that there were some benefit in terms of successful intubation and some risks in terms of tracheal tears. So there were some trauma in the highway. Believe it or not, we are now extremely good friends with Ilias. We met by chance at a conference together with Giulio Frova, and since then it was the beginning of a long-lasting friendship. I will come to this later on, but what I want to tell you is that a couple of years ago there was a survey in 2009 in the UK, and given the performance of the Frova and the need to switch to disposable, definitely the Frova introducer was the most used tracheal introducer in UK, which was the country where the Ashman guide was invented. So independently on the nationalism or independently or whatever, what we need to measure is performance. And if you want to have a closer look at this topic, just look for the core topics in highway management. The last edition edited by Tim Cook and Michael S. Christensen, it was me and Ilya Sodzovic to write down the chapter on tracheal introducers. And from there, you can see that at the end of 2019, there were 26 different brands or models of introducers, 8 different materials, 14 different variations for materials, 17 colors, 9 of them were hollow, 16 were coudé, 3 were curved, 7 had other function, steerable, malleable, or whatever. So from 1973, we have now an explosion of tracheal introducers because there's some actual benefit when using them. I think that this is particularly highlighted in this recent paper, where you also can see Ilya Sodzovic. This was one of the papers which were sent out for your reading before the webinar. And this is a paper clearly and elegantly comparing different kind of tracheal introducers. And what you can see here is that subtle differences in material of introducers can have a marked effect on safety and performance. This is what people who are very familiar with tracheal introducers know, but this was one of the very first papers to show it clearly. Very interestingly, there was a very good performance for the Frova introducer, and there was also a very bad performance for some other introducers which were discouraged to use on the patient because the combination of material or their design, which was not error-proof, could lead to damage on the patient. I just want to show you this table, which is clearly highlighting 2 important points. The first one is maintenance of curvature. This is a very important one. So you can see here some time-lapse pictures that are taken from the paper I showed you, and you see that in the same time frame of 4 seconds, there are introducers who get closer to their original shape in a faster time. Some of them, they take more time to get back. This is important because if we want to shape some weight introducer to overcome a certain difficulty, some of them keep this memory for enough time to make it. Some of them, they don't. This reflects into clinical practice, so you can see that first time, let me say, overall insertion success was 90% for some introducers, so the FROVA, the P3, or whatever, and was 77% for other introducers. So despite being the same tool, differences in material, in shape, in length, or whatever, affect performance. So this is also one point which needs to be clearly highlighted. If we want to summarize today, I may say that the FROVA introducer is the only one that is equalizing the Eschmann guide in terms of success, and both of them, they have a lower rate of complication if compared with many other introducers. Okay, we need specific studies or whatever to be more precise, but the concept is this. And this is the result of the different design, of the different material, and the different technique which stays behind the introducer. Let's go to the pitfalls so that we can realize why some of them are doing better, why are doing worse, and why they cause harm or damage. First point is absolutely the indication for use of tracheal introducers. When we use them, the idea is that we locate the curved tip of the bougie below the epiglottis, and we push in a partly blinded way. So if we don't have a very good view of the larynx, then we push something blindly. This can be a problem because we don't know where we are pushing. For this reason, there's a strict indication to use tracheal introducers in grade 1 or 2 if we want to perform a gentle laryngoscopy. For example, the patient has some 20,000 euro implants and we want to be gentle on the laryngoscope, so we reduce the force that we are applying. We lose a little bit of visibility, but we use a bougie just to overcome this. The real indication is the grade 2B, so only arytenoid is visible, or grade 3, which is only epiglottis visible. Use of introducers is extremely and importantly discouraged in all those patients where we don't have a good view of the epiglottis, because we don't know where we are pushing if you're doing it blindly. So we could easily perforate the piriform sinus, or we could easily perforate trachea, we could luxate arytenoids or whatever. So let me say up to grade 3, there's a strong indication for introducer. 3 extreme, let me say, leave it only in very, very expert hands, but generally discouraged. If you follow this indication, then you will have a real benefit from using a tracheal introducer. My friend from Romania, Dr. Daniela Godoroja, reminds us that those introducers that come with a stylet, they need to be used without a stylet. This was a question, an important question in the early 2000s, because the FROVA introducer came with a, I think it was a metal introducer inside the stylet, inside the bougie, which made it particularly stiff. This stylet inside was designed only for storage, so that if you move the introducer, it didn't get bent. And it had to be removed from the introducer before its use, because it makes introducer far more stiff, which could result in damage if we push against anatomical structures. The use of air exchange catheters or tracheal introducers has been studied also through supraglottic airway devices in a blind fashion. This is something that I personally discourage, and this is something that, according to literature data, has a poor performance. Today, what we may suggest is either use of dedicated catheters for intubation through supraglottic airway, and this is the case of the entry catheter, or coupling the bougie with an endoscope. So going down with an endoscope, placing the bougie through a superglottic inside the trachea, and then use the bougie as a guide to insert the tracheal tube. What I mean is, don't use them blindly, because it's exactly the same condition that I described before. Another point which is extremely important when using bougie is how we use them, how deep we put them. I like diving. I always take some highway gadget with me when I dive. And there's a motto between divers. You say, the deeper you go, the better it feels. This is an interesting phenomenon. It's called the Martini effect, or nitrous oxide narcosis. It's because of partial pressures of nitrous, which goes up and makes us feel a little bit silly or drunk. But when you use tracheal catheters, might it be introducer, bougie, or air exchange catheter, this rule doesn't work. Each catheter has some numbers on it, and this was designed to know exactly where we are and not to go too deep. Let me say that any airway catheter should not be inserted deeper than 25-26 centimeters at interincisor level. This is because average length or average distance between the teeth and the vocal cords is between 14 and 17 centimeters. Average distance between vocal cords and carina is 7-9 millimeters. So if we stay in 25-26, we know for sure that we are below vocal cords, but we are not after carinal bifurcation. And this is the safer area of the trachea because it's linear, it's wide. So even if you have a catheter in there, the risk of a perforation or a lesion is lower. If we go deeper, the risk of entering a bronchus or lacerating a bronchus, especially from a close end, is very high. So don't go that deep or you will have troubles. And if you look at literature, different reports of airway injury or hemorrhage associated with different catheters. And this is particularly true with any disposable catheter, because you remember, the gum elastic bougie, the Eschmann guide, was made out of resin. It was very soft. So even if it went deeper in the bronchial tree, it was less keen to perforate or to make some damage. But when they switched towards disposable, which is PVC, Teflon, polyethylene, or whatever, it is stiffer. So don't go deep with these devices. This is a report from an airway hemorrhage, and if you look closely at this report, they were looking for clicks and hold up, and they reached up about 30 centimeters, which is a lot, which is below carina. If you take a look at what happened, there was blood through the right bronchial tree and an interluminal flap of tissue, which lacerated the wall of the intermediate bronchus. So probably this catheter was inserted far more than 28 centimeters, because otherwise there's no reason to reach the intermediate bronchus. This is a very nice book. It comes from my very good friend, William Rosenblatt. If you look at the chapter for stylet and intubation and introducers, you may still read that you should not advance it to a maximum distance of 45 centimeters, which is if you expect your tracheal introducer to come out of belly button, because it's indeed very deep. 45 centimeters is really a lot. So please remember the magic number, 23 to 26 at incisors is a very good compromise between deep enough to be effective, but not so deep to be traumatic. Another point is what I mentioned before, the search for hold up or tracheal clicks. You have to know that when the Ben catheter was introduced, so the Eschmann guide, it was 1973, which is exactly the year that I was born. And at that time, it was not so common to have capnography in OR. It was not even common to have saturation in OR. So when you were placing blindly a tracheal introducer, the only way to know that you were in trachea was the search for these two signs. The idea was, if I'm in the esophagus, I can push down and it will go down. If I'm in trachea, at certain point it will stop. This is called hold up. The second point was, if I move this bougie in and out, the tip of the bougie will go against tracheal rings, so I will have the tracheal clicks. If I don't have them, probably I'm not in trachea. So this was good at that time because there were no alternatives. This was good at that time because it was the Eschmann guide, soft polyester resin. So it was not PVC, it was not Teflon, it was not polyethylene. So either it could be good at that time, it is not at all good today. So there is interesting literature for this, the dangers of the hold up with the trauma, and the idea of a traffic light bougie, a bougie that you can see here in this picture, which highlights a green zone, a yellow zone, and a red zone. The deeper you go, you are in the red zone. So once again, 25, 26 centimeters, and no search for hold up in clicks. Particularly, I want to visualize the idea of the click. If you take a look at different introducers, probably the Eschmann guide has a longer tip, and this longer tip is probably close to anteroposterior tracheal diameter. So if you move it like this, you may elicit the click. But if you take the Frova or any other introducer, the tip is shorter, so you may easily be in trachea and do not have any click. What you will be doing is just moving a stiff catheter inside a closed circuit in which you can literally tear the posterior wall. So avoid this kind of search. If you get it, okay, you are lucky, you will feel some history going through your fingers, but don't look for them because they are not reliable. You want to know if the tube is in the trachea? There's only one way. That is direct visualization, entitled carbon dioxide, fiber optic bronchoscopy examination, or if you like more, take a look. Our last publication, it came out August 18, 2022. This is the PUMA guideline for the prevention of unrecognized esophageal intubation. It was designed from the PUMA group, which I'm honored to be part of, together with Tim Cook, Stuart Marshall, and the endorsement of international societies, including your society and our society. This is the very first paper which gives you the way to find out and to exclude esophageal intubation. And this you can do with algorithms, with flowchart, with visual informations, and with, let me call them, error-proof concepts. And as you see below in the lower corner on your right, do not use tube misting, chest rise and fall, lung epigastric auscultation, and bougie hold up. So from now, it's low. Don't do it because it's wrong. Let's go further and let's take a look at this. This is a lung model of pneumothorax, which was obtained using an air exchange catheter inserted a little bit too much and connected to jet ventilation in these cases. This was a very nice paper. It was published by an interesting group. And what you see here, if you go too deep, also with a minimal flow of 1 liter, if the distal end of a hollow tracheal introducer or airway catheter or whatever goes inside the closed bronchus, what you may have is pneumothorax. So today, the use of oxygen through hollow catheters is some way discouraged. If you respect very closely the depth of insertion, if you use 1 liter flow, it could be okay. But you cannot be in hands of every doctor in the world. So the current recommendation is do not deliver oxygen through this way. If you're using an airway catheter, you may benefit of the so-called apnoic oxygenation. So use nasal cannula, high flow, or whatever it is to deliver oxygen during the apnoic phase of laryngoscopy, even if you're using a bougie or an airway exchange catheter. I mean, don't use the airway catheter for this purpose, even if it is hollow, because you may not know all the time where it is. So better to prevent than to correct. Let's move on and let's think also about the pitfalls. For example, not all introducers or bougies are suitable to be used with double lumen tubes. As a curiosity, you have to know that the Frova introducer was first produced in a length of 75 centimeters. And this was because it was designed to be used also with double lumen tubes. After a while, Giulio Frova realized that that was a big danger, and so he wanted it reduced to 65, so not to be used with double lumen tubes. This is a nice paper which came out a couple of years ago and showed that some introducers are extremely dangerous when used with a double lumen tube. Some of them are safer. Once again, everything is in material. So if you take the ProAct bougie, which is so-so, is different from another bougie in a different tube. Because the difference, and this is what the authors claim, is in material. So stiffer material are less keen to shearing, softer material are more keen to shearing. This was something that Giulio Frova knew many years ago that I experienced. So we enjoy to send out a response letter where the point is not only the material of the bougie, but also the type of tube that you're using, because the point is in connectors, it's not in the tube. So if you have a friction between the introducer and the connectors inside the tube, you may easily slice the bougie and find out, like you see here, pieces of the tracheal introducers inside the patient airway. So once again, the rule is do not use any kind of introducer with any kind of double lumen tube. Or if you want, just follow a chart of compatibility. Technically speaking, I don't think you need, because double lumen intubation is per se more difficult than conventional intubation. So if you have a difficult intubation, it could be much wiser to place a bougie with a conventional tube and then to use a tube exchanger to change the regular tube for a double lumen tube. And all of this if it is strictly mandatory to have a lung isolation. Because if you don't need this kind of isolation, you may use a different technique, like for example, I don't know, a bronchial blocker or whatever it is. So evaluate all of this carefully, because it's strongly advised not to use any tracheal introducer with any tube. This may be true also for other tubes. This is a case for laser-resistant tube, but once again, it's a problem of connectors. Whenever the edges of the connector are particularly, let me say, cutting or coming out of the profile of the tube, the risk of slicing any catheter passing inside is high. So if you need to do all of these, always take a look at your bougie once you withdraw it and remove it from the tracheal tube. Tips and tricks, there's many of them. And I like to start with this, which is funny. This was the TV series ER in 2006. When Giulio first saw it, he was particularly proud because they were using the Frova introducer in the middle of a very famous and successful American TV series. But at a certain point, he gets mad because, as you see from the picture here, this guy forgot the tube. There's no tube here. So this lady is saying, maybe we had better to call Professor Frova immediately. Okay, this is just for fun. The point is, and this is the very first tip that I can give you, introducers are excellent devices. They are simple, they are cheap, and they work. But you need to know how to use them. So if you want to get the best out of this device, you need to be trained. So use them also in easy airways, also in intermediate conditions, so that you get familiar with the feeling, with the feedback, the tactile feedback, the length, you develop your technique, and this makes them work properly. Apart from ER, there are different issues. As I told you before, indication is important. If you respect indication, introducers, looking at literature, perform around 80 to 95% if compared with 60% of stylettes. So here the answer to the very first questions, introducers are much better than stylettes. This is true with conventional laryngoscope, and this is probably more true with video laryngoscope, as recently designed in a couple of studies. This is a nice paper from my friend Thomas Mort. It was also part of the papers that were sent out for further readings. It describes an interesting situation, which is the opportunity of impingement. So take always good care of the size difference between the introducer that you're using and the tracheal tube that you're using, because if you have a large gap, the risk of impingement is high. In this case, you can easily rotate the tube or put it inversely on the bougie. So if the bougie curvature goes like this, you reverse the tube and reverse load it so that it gets some way straightened. But once again, the closer the gap between the tube and the bougie, the higher the success if you go through vocal cords. There's another interesting issue about how to hold the bougie. So this is a group from New Zealand, not a case. This is called the Kiwi grip, which was particularly enthusiastically received from emergency doctors. It comes from a good guy, especially Levitan. I know him and it's really great. They like this idea because they say, like this, I can handle my bougie much better. What I've always been criticizing, and I'm not the sole criticizer, okay? But what I've been always criticizing is that if you put the bougie like this, you trap the tail of the bougie inside the Murphy's eye. So you lose two things. The first one is the possibility to negotiate the passage of the bougie without moving also the tube. The second one, and this is not less important, is that you may have troubles with this because when you need to liberate the tube from the bougie, you need a second hand or you may lose the highway. So for this reason, I say that I don't like Kiwi and I like to make it Italian way. There was some slogan, they say Italian do it better. And so this is how I used to do. This is a live session from Euro Anesthesia. You may notice the banana in the background. So what I always do is loading the tube. I do it reversely. I choose my 25 so that I know that I don't have to go deeper than this. I block it between my fingers and I know that I can move everything liberally. Whenever I reach the incisors with my fingers, I know that I don't have to go farther. And I simply open my fingers, liberate the tube, and let the only tube scroll down. As it's curved, you see the bougie doesn't come along with the tube, and I'm safe with depth, and I'm also quite independent on external help. This is my way, this is the Italian way. I find it more ergonomic than the Kiwi grip. This may not be the perfect one, but it's just a suggestion. If you use your bougie, you will find your best way. And if you respect the rules, it will be a very, very good friend. One more tip, how to use the bougie depends on the laryngoscope. That's true. If you're using a Macintosh, so any device which is based on the line of sight, the bougie needs to be straight or moderately bent. If you use a video laryngoscope, which is not based on the line of sight, but looks around the corner, then you need to curve your bougie more or less with the same shape of the blade. Because when you use a video laryngoscope, we don't have a straight and linear pathway for the bougie. If you do this, don't use an inner stylet, if any, and this will help you a lot. Because there's a problem with video laryngoscope, and they always put it in this funny picture. They changed laryngoscopy because they are like the ring in the eyes of this girl looking at this guy. He's a little bit ugly, we must admit, but when she sees the diameter of the diamonds, he becomes immediately beautiful. This is exactly what happens with video laryngoscope. They made any laryngoscopy easy, brilliant, but they switched difficulties. So sometimes, like my very good friend Lawrence Taylor says, with a video laryngoscope, you see perfectly. You can also see perfectly that you fail. So you have this strange situation where you can have a good laryngoscopy, but you are not successful in addressing the tube between vocal cords, which may also result in airway trauma. This was studied very elegantly in a paper by Michael Aziz A lot of laryngoscopists explored, almost 350,000 laryngoscopes. And what was observed that whenever there was a classic laryngoscopy failing and they switched to a video laryngoscope, the success rate, the rescue success rate was 92%. So this means that in the small number of failed laryngoscopy, there was a small number which could not be intubated, even if you had a video laryngoscope. What they did, in some cases, they went to bronchoscope, in some cases, they went to tracheostomy, in some cases, they stepped back to Macintosh and took a bougie. So this is an old friend, this may work, but overall, it could be a very good solution to solve those situations in which you have a very good laryngeal exposure with a video laryngoscope, but you don't have a good opportunity to pass the vocal cords with the tracheal tube. This was studied by the group of Sabine Engerman and published in Anesthesia a couple of years ago. Frova catheter, which is the one that they were studying, was outperforming the stylet in terms of success. It was 98.2% versus 85%. So it was huge difference. And when they did this, also in other studies, there was always the suggestion to use a tracheal tube introducer also over a video laryngoscope to improve performance. This was a paper that we submitted. We are just pending answer, but it's just to show you that there are a series of advantages when using a bougie with a video laryngoscope. You can deliver oxygen if you want with the hollow ones. You can have indirect signs of position control. You can downscale the tube with introducer in place if you need to go for a smaller tube. You reduce and minimize the risk of blind spot. You move better in a reduced space. That's the story that I told you about outer diameter and inner diameter. And you can also change the shape and facilitate the passage through the curves that are maintained with video laryngoscopy. All of this came out in a very, very, very important study, which is here represented. Okay, these are just the option. Remember, even if you're using a video laryngoscope with a Macintosh blade or a Miller blade, remember, straight if you're using with a line of sight principle, curved if you're using it with a look around the corner principle. And this is the live demonstration of how you can couple it. So in this case, the bougie is shaped like this to follow the curve of the video laryngoscope. You are simply having a good view. You introduce it laterally. This may help. And once you are in, you will see that the curve of the bougie will bring you directly between vocal cords. And this will make much easier to address the railroading of tracheal tube. This was probably the principle behind a very famous study from Brian Driver and a group of US emergency doctors, which compared the performance of stylet and bougie in emergency department. They were using Macintosh laryngoscope or Macintosh video laryngoscope, but the point is, and you see it from the Kaplan-Meier curve there, that endotracheal tube plus bougie outperformed endotracheal tube plus stylet, also in emergency department and also with video laryngoscope. This was an important result from this study because this comes also to the question, what is working better? Definitely tracheal introducer independently on the type of laryngoscope that we're using. There was only one main concern with this study, that all the group from Brian Driver was using a tracheal introducer since years. So they were all experts. And this is what they call a selection bias. It's true, because when the same author, but with a different group, applied the same study in ICU, where most of people were not trained in using a bougie and simply learned how to use it from a video. And if you're curious with this, please go on JAMA, search for the supplementary materials and take a look at the video. They put a straight bougie down to the belly button with not taking care of how deep they are or whatever they are. So this study is the proof that the same tool without experience can be the best one or the worst one, because the difference is in person who is using that tool. So this is very important and need to be interpreted cautiously. But we come to an important conclusion. Where you are in critical situation, might it be emergency department, might it be ICU, we know from the tube study that there's a high incidence of cardiovascular events. So when you are working on ICU, you need to have success on your first passage. Well, in this setting, and this would definitely love me and Didier Zozovic, the advice, which is also raising from literature, is that your first attempt should be the best one. So put together the best that you have, which is video laryngoscope plus bougie. No matter if that hour will be easy or difficult, but you will have your best setting for the first attempt. I always like to say that it's just like your first dating with a woman you like. In that first dating, you will be wearing your best suit, will be a lot of perfume, you will be carefully dressed and everything. After that, if you get married in 2 years, you will forget it. But your first attempt, you will play in the best possible way. And this is exactly what we wrote together with Iliads. As I told you, we now are really good friends in this editorial commenting the driver study, which is that when the going gets tough, the talk get going. So when the game is hard, you need to play your better cards on your first round. In 2022, we may say that there is extended indication for bougies. So with laryngoscopy, emergency department, you can use them also for tube exchange, as I told you, but not inside the tube. They are a little bit short, so may not work. But with a tube in place, you may switch from nasal to oral or from oral to nasal, which could be of some help. I have some noise in the background.
En audio.
No, there's some mic open, probably. Okay, now it's okay. And another important application of bougie is their use for emergency front of neck access. So there's been evidence from the NAP4 that the finger cricotirotomy or the scalpel bougie cricotirotomy is faster, allows a larger bore tube, and probably lowers the risk of displacement. I may discuss hours on this. Most of the studies from the NAP4 reflected a reality which was different, and most of the studies for the bougie-assisted cricotirotomy come from mannequin. Mannequin have the small disadvantages of not bleeding, but nevertheless, I believe that the idea of performing an emergency cricotirotomy with a scalpel, a bougie, and a tube, which you find everywhere, is probably one of the best way to push people to the idea of cricotirotomy and to perform it early if it is needed. So I also think that application of bougie in this setting is very important. One recommendation, we saw it during our training courses, be very careful should you use a bougie for emergency cricotirotomy. Try to negotiate the passage of the bougie only after you remove the scalpel, because you may cut inadvertently the bougie and create a kind of valve system which will prevent the bougie to be removed from the tube. So be very careful with this, because you may take out the bougie and take out also the tube, because it will be some way caught in this incision that you inadvertently perform. Okay, let's go to the final point, which is the role of these devices in airway management. And probably it can be reassumed in this picture. Cormac 3, full stomach, emergency setting, bleeding patients. What to do here? Having the tool to attempt your first laryngoscopy, video laryngoscopy, with your maximal setting. And as I told you in advance, maximal setting is today video laryngoscope plus bougie if you choose this approach, or you may have any other cricotirotomy, preliminary tracheotomy, airway, I don't know, bronchoscopy, supraglottic plus bronchoscopy. Okay, but if you choose laryngoscopy, the very best option today is coupling a bougie. What is important? It's not the tool, but the man who uses it. And so I like always to cite this Murphy's law, which is the length of a minute depends on which side of the toilet door you are. Perception of time, perception of events is different, especially during the crisis. And this has been elegantly demonstrated. This is a nice simulation paper. Each of the blue dots that you see there is the amount of time perceived by single doctors during an emergency scenario in simulation. Interestingly, the time span was the same, but every doctor referred a different perceived time. So we lose everything, also perception of time. We may easily lose the idea of going too deep or not using a bougie or repeating attempts or whatever. So I believe today that everything is in something to correct the so-called human factor. I have this funny slide. This is the rectal tone of anesthesiologist plotted against saturation. So when saturation is okay, our rectal tone is perfect. When saturation goes down, rectal tone increases. And when saturation falls, our rectal tone is lost. So we have troubles with laundry, but above all, we turn off our brain. So use of bougie is something that has to be placed in a strategy. Remember, videolaryngoscope, they are brilliant, but no videolaryngoscope deliver oxygen. So if we are in an emergency crisis with difficult to intubate and difficult to ventilate, the only option may be cryotherotomy, even if you are very expert with a bougie. So always put your priorities in the right place, and priority is not intubation, it's never intubation. No patient die because of a missed intubation. Patient die because we don't give oxygen, because we insist too much in attempt of intubation. So our focus, our attention should be oxygen. If we can deliver oxygen, and if we can do this using a bougie and a videolaryngoscope, perfect. But if we don't succeed, it's less important trying again rather than finding a different way. And in this perspective, I like this picture, though outdated. Remember that having all tools does not mean having a strategy. They look the same, they are not. Tools are important, but if we don't put them in the frame of a strategy, we don't have nothing. So remember, this is very important. What we have to do today is working on the human factor. Human factor means having a checklist, having something which can bring our confuse the brain back to the basics. So what to do, which are the steps, what I need, including the position of airway managers around the patient. The one who is taking care of the airway, the one who is taking care of cricot pressure, the one who is helping, the one who looks at the monitor, and so on. And bougie is there, but it's there to be used in the right time and in the right place. Today, the goal, I believe, in Tube study, the second study that we published on the Blue Journal, evidence from driver and whatever, teaches us that at least in emergency cases, we need to look at two perspectives. On one hand, maximize first pass success, and here the bougie is a powerful tool. And the other hand, respect hemodynamics, because people may be correctly intubated, but they have cardiac arrest 30 minutes later. So these are the 2 points where we have to work. In this perspective, the bougie is excellent, but it's not the magic tool. It cannot provide solution for any trouble. It needs to be used correctly. So put it through your brain. This is the only place where you always have to put your bougie. So in your brain, establish a strategy, make your plans. If it's case, use the bougie. If it's not, use a different technique. Get trained with all devices. The more you have, the better it is, but get trained. And above all, always locate them in a frame of a strategy. Otherwise, the best tool may be the worst result. So this is extremely important. I like the bougie for many reasons. One of them is that when I'm giving live lectures, they're excellent to point out on the dashboard. But technically speaking, they can be used in easy airways for training, when you need to respect dentures, when you need to be delicate with intubation. Think of singers, think of previously operated patients or whatever. You may like to reduce laryngeal lift, so you may benefit from a smaller tool. And they can use in difficult airways to improve first pass success. And in all those cases, when you have and reducing the size of dice distance, which may benefit of a thinner device. This said, I believe that the best conclusion of this talk is in Arthur Schopenhauer's word: in each art, simplicity is essential, and it is at least dangerous to ignore it. Almost 70 years after Sir Robert Mackintosh introduced the bougie, we are still here talking about it and realizing that it's probably underused. So this is simplicity. This works not less than the wheel, which is with us since thousands and thousands of years. Thank you so much for your attention. And here's my daughter, which is already fond of aero management, just dressing like a doctor. Hope to see some of you in Antalya next week, and feel free to go on with any question.
Muchas gracias, Max. Realmente ha sido extraordinario. Nos ha brindado una visión tremendamente completa acerca de este dispositivo de tan común uso para nosotros, y creo que hemos disfrutado de esta revisión. Yo creo que va a haber algunos comentarios, yo tengo algunas preguntas para ti, así que yo quisiera en este momento darle la palabra al doctor Jorge Godoy, pero también los invito a todos a levantar la mano. Hay una herramienta abajo en el Zoom donde dice reacciones y uno puede levantar la mano, o también pueden escribir en el chat algún comentario o alguna pregunta o algún saludo. A nosotros nos encanta que nos saluden y saber desde dónde nos ven. Así que, doctor Godoy, lo escuchamos. Está silenciado, Jorge, está silenciado. El doctor Godoy es intensivista, ex jefe de una UCI muy importante, un hospital muy importante en Santiago de Chile. Así que yo creo que su opinión es muy, muy interesante. Gracias, Jorge.
Gracias, Ricardo. Doctor Max Sorbello, muchas gracias. Partió muy bien aclarando los conceptos y las denominaciones que uno son confusas, pero usted las aclaró bastante bien. Yo no sé, doctor Max Sorbello, si usted nombró dentro de sus trucos, de los tics, ¿ya? Que a veces pasa que cuando uno va introduciendo el tubo traqueal, se produce un stop, ¿ya? Y eso es porque la punta del tubo está tocando la epiglotis, la punta de la epiglotis. Entonces, una maniobra que yo la vi descrita y una vez me vio, como observador, vi a un colega que estaba y se le sintió el stop. Entonces, lo que se describe, y así se hizo, es retirar un poquito y hacer un giro en 90 grados. No sé si usted lo nombró eso, pero es una cosa que yo la vi descrita y me tocó observar en un operador que le pasó esto, que estaba introduciendo, se produce el stop, y ahí yo le dije, retiren un poquito y gírala. Ya, porque lo había leído, digamos. Eso.
Fully agree. So this happens with epiglottis, it happens also with arytenoids, and this happens more when you are using a large tube with introducer, because you have a larger gap between the bougie and the tube. Corrective measures could be downscaling the tube. So if you're using a tube number 8, go down for a number 7, for example, or as you mentioned very correctly, you simply remove the tube and you put it, yes, exactly oppositely the curvature of the bougie on the tube. So this means that some way it will get straightened, but above all, that the tip of the bevel of the tube will be facing up and not anymore down. And this may solve different cases. This is an option. Today, I think that video laryngoscope may help too, because if you place the bougie between vocal cords, normally this brings the larynx a little bit down. So you have a better view with the bougie in rather than before. So this sometimes helps because you can see the site of impingement, and some external manipulation of the larynx may solve the problem. But definitely, yes, if you don't have this good view, removing the tube, changing in direction and going in again works. I love to adopt a technique. So whenever I use the bougie and I go down with the tube, I never push. Whenever I feel minimal resistance, I rotate the tube. This normally solves 80% of troubles. But because if you push, it's worse. Because you get an obstacle and you may injure the highway. So rotating is always better. But it's really good question.
Gracias. Gracias.
Gracias.
Muy buena pregunta. Jorge, ¿tienes alguna experiencia tú con tus residentes, con tus becados, tus staff, con el uso de bullies versus estiletes en intensivo, en intubaciones en pacientes críticos?
Mira, no hay una, por lo menos cuando yo estuve a cargo ahí, no había como una normativa y muchos... ¿Me escuchas? Perfecto. No había una, no estaba normado nosotros usarlo, yo creo que ahora con la introducción y lo que nos mostró el doctor Max Sorbello, yo creo que debe ser una opción de poder más bien protocolizar esto, digamos. Pero en los residentes que teníamos, habían algunos que lo usaban y otros usaban el estilete. Así que no había una dirección clara, digamos. Te fijas, era muy variado de acuerdo al operador.
Claro, perfectamente. Y lo otro, a mí me parece muy importante como truco, a propósito de lo que estamos hablando, es que es siempre aconsejable no retirar el laringoscopio de la boca del paciente, porque la boca, al retirar el laringoscopio, tiende a cerrarse y aunque uno tenga el bully enhebrado correctamente en la tráquea, se dificulta el paso del tubo traqueal. Entonces también es importante, y si además estamos usando un videolaringoscopio, podemos mantener la vigilancia de la intubación correcta bajo visión directa. Eso es muy importante. No sé qué opinas, Maxi.
Well, I think that you mentioned important points. The first one is that whenever you're using an highway catheter, might it be introducer or tube exchanger or whatever, it's always better to keep the laryngoscope in place. First of all, because you may see something, but secondly, because you create room. So you try to put everything on a line, it makes more room, and it makes easier for any kind of movement. And the second point that you mentioned, I mean, the first point that you mentioned, is about the controversial results. When we put down data from InTube study, we saw that the bougie is largely underused in ICU. And when Driver wrote the paper for bougie versus stylet in ICU, it was very clear that most of the doctors performing this intubation were not familiar with bougie. So this emphasizes an important concept. If you know the tool, you can take the best out of it. If you don't know, it's much more easy that you get troubles rather than benefit. So this is why my suggestion to use them also in easy cases, so that you get, I mean, what is extremely important with the bougie is the haptics. So the feeling that you have on your fingers. I'm fascinated, but bougie were more used with COVID-19, and in COVID-19, there was an increased description of airway trauma. I think that one of the reasons behind this was wearing double gloves, having glasses, keeping far from the patient, was losing this sensitivity. The bougie is is literally matter of fingers. If you feel resistance, if you feel the clicks, if you feel any opposition. So that's why it's very important to get familiar with it.
Exactamente. Antes de ofrecerle la palabra al doctor Juan Carlos Mandujano de...
Hola.
Perdona, Juan Carlos, discúlpame. El estudio que publicó Tim Cook por ahí a comienzos de los años 2000, en que hablaba que en unos 500 pacientes, me acuerdo yo que era el tamaño muestral, él hizo una evaluación donde describió también los grados de laringoscopía de 3A, 3B, 2A, 2B, son las divisiones, y él obtuvo alrededor de un 97% de éxito de intubación usando solamente un laringoscopio Macintosh con un Gamma Elastic Bougie. Eso a mí me parece tremendamente interesante, especialmente para nuestro ambiente latinoamericano, en el cual no tenemos acceso muchas veces a tecnología más avanzada y que posiblemente una estrategia como esa pudiera ser una recomendación del solamente agregar el buen uso de un Game Elastic Boogie para mejorar nuestro rendimiento en el éxito de intubación de nuestros pacientes. No sé qué te parece, Max, y yo creo que también es extensiva la pregunta para el doctor Mandujano.
This is an excellent question. Technically speaking, if you want to manage intubation, okay, I'm focusing on intubation, what you need is a Macintosh laryngoscope, a bougie, a laryngeal mask classic, and a bronchoscope, nothing else. Maybe, I don't know, without maybe, capnography, okay? But to manage any intubation, you just need this, because most of intubations in expert hands can be handled with a laryngoscope and a bougie. Those that you don't succeed with these are really difficult intubation, which may benefit from awake intubation with a bronchoscope. This is literally like this, because success rate of Macintosh plus bougie is more or less the same of video laryngoscopes. The benefit from video laryngoscope is seeing it bigger, seeing it better, but sometimes, even if you have a very good view, this doesn't mean that it will be easy to intubate. So on larger numbers, I believe that success rate is the same. So if you can't afford to have a video laryngoscope in every operatory room, I believe that you should have a bougie in every operatory room, because this can help solving many problems. I don't want to say all, but it's really powerful tool.
Gracias, Juan Carlos.
Sí, buenos días, Ricardo. Pues antes que nada agradecerle al doctor Sorbello, es una excelente plática. Yo dentro de los comentarios que puse es que desde el día que conocí los estiletes o los boogies me enamoré de ellos. A la fecha ya en casi 20 años en vía aérea y en los últimos 10 años de haberlos conocido, es una de las cosas más básicas que se volvió para mí. De hecho, en la plática sobre manejo de vía aérea con mínimos recursos, una de las cosas que más enfatizo es el uso precisamente de esos estiletes, de esos recursos que podemos contar de bajo costo, porque pues un estilete, un proba, una guía, un boogie de este tipo, pues nos va a costar que aproximadamente 200 pesos mexicanos, 300 pesos mexicanos, que estaríamos hablando de 10, 15 dólares, cuando mucho, ¿no? O sea, algo que se vuelve mucho más accesible que con las pláticas anteriores que teníamos con el doctor Marcelo en Brasil de un videolaringoscopio de 50, 60 o más dólares. Pues realmente un boogie es mucho más accesible con un complemento de algo que habitualmente estamos acostumbrados a manejar, como una pala Macintosh, a pesar de la historia que pueda tener esto como una que debe de pasar. Creo que algo que sí se debe de hacer mucho énfasis es ese manejo del boogie de una manera más constante. Dentro de la experiencia que yo he tenido manejando, introduciendo hasta llegar a esa parte un poco más de profundidad en la carina, la gran ventaja que hemos visto es que si el paciente tose, a diferencia de cuando solamente lo abocan 2-3 centímetros, que también es algunos trabajos de alguna forma en que algunos compañeros lo han manejado, pues la diferencia es que si el paciente tose y nos espantamos tantito, lo que tendemos a hacer es jalar un poco, pero ya cuando el boogie está dentro de la tráquea, aunque el paciente tosa, el único camino que va a seguir el tubo endotraqueal es dentro de la tráquea. Cuando el paciente tose y jalamos un poco, a veces se ha ido, yo tengo compañeros que han tenido esa experiencia que tose tantito o tiene algún tipo de reflejo, lo siguen, lo jalan, lo vuelven a avanzar y se van al esófago. Entonces, es una de las cosas que para muchos ha hecho que digan, es que finalmente no funciona, cuando en realidad es una herramienta, como dice el doctor, subutilizada, debería ser parte del arsenal con el que estemos trabajando todos los días en las distintas áreas, no solamente en un quirófano, Yo soy muy apasionado con el artículo de TM Cook acerca de esa diferencia de los grados de laringoscopía y de la efectividad que él menciona, donde te dice que hasta una vía aérea con un Cormac 3A, que es prácticamente cómo ves que la epiglotis se despega de la pared posterior, aunque no veas la cara interna, que se puede solucionar con un boogie, incluso aún con un videolaringoscopio. No necesitaríamos un grado de Cormac 1, un Cormac 2, 2A. Podríamos no estar sufriendo, complementando ese espacio ya con la utilización del boogie, porque nos facilita enormemente. Entonces yo estoy completamente a favor de que los estiletes o boogies deben de ser utilizados, y como mencionó el doctor, primero y antes que otra cosa, en paciente de diario normal. Las primeras ocasiones que hice una intubación con este tipo de dispositivos, no fue muy tranquila, porque fue un paciente con 22 pulgadas de circunferencia cervical. Lo intubamos obviamente con todos los preceptos que hemos aprendido, paciente en posición de semi-Fowler, con un pequeño bulto, con cosas que nos facilitaran esto. Y es increíble cómo a través del guante, ese cliqueo que se siente al pasar los anillos traqueales, de momento te espanta y dices, se siente horrible. Después terminas diciendo, bendito Dios que lo sentí, porque fue lo que me garantizó que estaba dentro de la tráquea, y aprendes que ese cliqueo es parte de esa diferencia, esa percepción que logras, es parte de esa diferencia, la rotación del boogie para avanzarlo, o lo mismo que te recomiendan, cuando vayas avanzando el tubo, desplazándolo sobre el boogie, es hacerlo girar sobre su propio eje, y créeme que aún comprendiendo la situación de la permanencia del biolaringoscopio o del laringoscopio para ampliar el espacio, en muchas ocasiones hemos hecho la intubación de sacas el laringo y lo desplazas con toda la tranquilidad, bien lubricado, y no te da más problemas. De hecho, igual creo que dentro de las extubaciones programadas de una vía aérea difícil, el boogie, nosotros hemos estado en pacientes de columna con posiciones de pronas completamente durante 10, 12 horas, y la extubación con eso, no te imaginas la tranquilidad que te da ver cómo el paciente le dejas aún el boogie, ya no el intercambiador, le dejas el boogie. La tolerancia que tienen los pacientes a ellos es enorme, y es algo que yo le agradezco mucho a quien nos haya inventado, al doctor Froba o a quien más nos haya inventado, porque es un recurso que de verdad nos da un gran alivio en el servicio de anestesia, pero también en las áreas críticas o en las áreas de urgencias. Creo que es algo que les ha dado miedo manejar, pero creo que el día que los lleguen a utilizar con la frecuencia adecuada, van a terminar por enamorarse y darse cuenta que es algo que se debería de usar así, casi de manera obligada en todos los pacientes, antes de podernos enfrentar a un paciente más crítico en cuanto a abordaje de vía aérea. Nuevamente, de verdad, doctor Sorbello, muchas felicidades, una plática excelente que nos ayuda a recordar de este recurso, y ojalá y todos lleguemos a tener esa oportunidad de verlo como un arsenal, que más que verlo como que por si acaso, lo tengamos de manera constante, y sobre todo empezamos a darle el uso más adecuado a esto. Muchas felicidades, Ricardo, y muchas gracias al doctor.
Muchas gracias, Juan Carlos. Quiero que en honor al tiempo, por favor, pasemos a las preguntas. Gabriela, a ver si podemos proyectarlas, las últimas preguntas 3 y 4, antes de que se nos vayan nuestros amigos de traducciones remotas. Eso, ahí tenemos. Ah, no, esa es la respuesta. No, esa no es Gabriela. Esa es la respuesta, Gabriela. Bueno, a ver. Esta es la pregunta 3. Sí, la pregunta 3. Entonces, ¿cuál es la diferencia técnica entre estiletes, introductores e intercambiadores de tubo? La longitud, el material, la función o todas las anteriores. Todos ellos. por favor, vayan opinando. Al respecto, ¿se ve la pregunta? Yo creo que sí, se ve. Se ve la pregunta y están respondiendo. Yo creo que es un 100% de respuestas de todos ellos. Perfecto. Finalizamos la votación. Max, ¿qué comentario te merece este resultado? ¿Qué puedes comentar sobre el 100% de respuesta de todos ellos, la diferencia técnica?
So I couldn't see the results, but I understand everybody agreed on the last one.
Todos ellos 100%, sí.
Okay, this means that they like my lecture.
Ahí está. Sí, por supuesto. Vamos a la última pregunta. Ahí está la anterior. La última pregunta es, ¿qué aplicaciones tienen los introductores traqueales en el manejo de la vía aérea? La intubación, extubación y cambios de tubos, cricotilotomía o todas las anteriores. Entonces ahí vamos recibiendo. ¿No se puede ver la pregunta, Max? ¿Cuáles son las preguntas? Son la intubación solamente, extubación y cambio de tubo solamente, cricotilotomía solamente, y la última, todos ellos. Parece que es bastante significativo. Vamos a finalizar la votación. Compartimos los resultados. Ahí están los resultados, Max. La gran mayoría se inclinó por que los introductores traqueales son útiles en todas esas instancias. Está silenciado.
No, just to make a quick comment. Technically speaking, that 11% of people that said intubation remain right, because this is what the bougie was designed for, and this is out of any doubt. We can extend indication. We can use it for cricotilotomy. We can use it also for extubation, tube exchange, despite it's not the perfect tool. So let me say that everybody wants either the first one or the last one. They are right. I think that they took very literally my message, which is that you need to use them carefully for other maneuvers than intubation, because it was not designed for this. Because also for cricotilotomy, the bougie is too long. So if you make it automatic, like for intubation, you will go 20 centimeters down, you will be ending up in diaphragm. So technically speaking, there should be a shorter bougie for cricotilotomy, a longer bougie, straight-tipped for tube exchange. So let me say that who said intubation is not completely wrong, and who said all of them is not completely right. But this is a perfect balance.
Además que quizás es importante recalcar que para el intercambio de tubos es preferible usar el catéter intercambiador de tubos y no el gum elastic bougie. ¿Qué opinas al respecto, Max? Probablemente para nosotros acá no tengamos un conocimiento y un uso y disponibilidad adecuada de los intercambiadores de tubos, pero sí de gum elastic bougie. Entonces, es importante esa consideración a la hora de hacer un cambio de tubo en un paciente de UCI usando alguno de estos introductores traqueales. ¿Usted qué opina?
Well, So I'm not sure that I got the question completely because I had an overlap between the Spanish and the English version. So you were just asking me about the concept that using introducers for extubation or tube exchange or whatever may be tricky. Is this the point?
No. Es que muchas veces en nuestros países no disponemos de catéteres intercambiadores de tubos, pero sí de Gum-Elastic Bougie. No es ideal hacer el intercambio de tubo con el Gum-Elastic Bougie, puesto que es más rígido y puede producir mayor trauma. El catéter intercambiador de tubo está hecho para eso, pero en nuestros países muchas veces no está disponible o no tenemos la costumbre de usarlos.
Okay, I got it. Because there's something strange with audio. You have at the same time English and Spanish. So I simply switch to Spanish because I can easily get it. So it's much easier for you to use introducer for all this purpose because it's not so common to have airway exchange catheters. That's correct. This is the question. And so if this is okay. Well, the limit of a tracheal introducer for tube exchange is the length because it's shorter. So sometimes it could be difficult to catch the bougie and to change the tube. And the second limit is that if the introducer comes with a curved tip, it could be sometimes complicated to put it out or to put the other tube in. But I agree, if you have a certain experience with the device, you can easily do it. And in any case, it is much better than nothing. Much better than nothing. So my recommendation is no flow inside. Use always a laryngoscope or a video laryngoscope to assist the tube exchange. And if you can use only a tracheal introducer, it's more than okay.
Exactamente. Querido amigo, doctor Max Sorbello, por favor reciba los agradecimientos de parte de la Universidad Diego Portales, su Facultad de Medicina, el programa de formación en anestesiología y reanimación, por esta brillante conferencia con un gran contenido que nos ha brindado hoy día. Nos sentimos muy honrados por su presencia. Creo representar el sentir de todos los colegas y de Latinoamérica también, por esta participación suya que nos ha traído una información muy relevante que impacta importantemente en nuestra práctica y nos ha permitido aclarar muchos conceptos y, por supuesto, esto va a ser transmitido a nuestra experiencia clínica con la mejoría en el manejo seguro de nuestros pacientes. Así que, por favor, reciba nuestros agradecimientos y con un abrazo muy afectuoso por su disponibilidad, su entusiasmo y su excelente exposición en este día.
Muchas gracias, Ricardo, y todos los amigos. It was really a pleasure for me, an honor, and I always enjoy sharing opinion, knowledge, and it's fantastic to make it from one side of the world to the other. So really great. Once again, thank you. I applaud to your work with all colleagues, and it would be really great to meet again face-to-face sooner or later, and that's it. Thank you. It was a pleasure again, really. Stay safe, you all.
Un agrado. Gracias. Voy a compartir el resto de la pantalla mía para poder presentarles lo que sigue. Este es un mapa que tiene algún tiempo, pero yo creo que se puede haber crecido un poco, que son puntos desde donde nos ven, desde toda Latinoamérica, incluyendo Norteamérica, Estados Unidos, algunos lugares, España. Eso es el puntito que ve Israel, es nuestro amigo Luis Gaitini, que siempre nos honra con su presencia. Nosotros tenemos redes sociales en nuestro webinario, tenemos ya más de 500 seguidores en nuestro sitio de Facebook del webinario. Tenemos también el Facebook de nuestra página del programa Anestesiología. Tenemos un canal de YouTube donde están todas las conferencias anteriores desde el año 2021. Ya tenemos, con esto van a ser más de 20 conferencias que todos ustedes pueden revisarlas. Hay un código QR que pueden fácilmente abrir el enlace de YouTube y pueden tener acceso a este importantísimo material que los ponemos a su disposición de manera totalmente gratuita. También en las redes sociales, en Instagram y en Twitter también tenemos nuestro enlace de Twitter. Quiero invitarlos al próximo congreso una vez más. Esto ya lo hemos anunciado en veces anteriores, al próximo congreso de la EAMS, el Congreso Europeo de Vía Aérea, que se va a realizar en la ciudad de Antalya, en Turquía, y va a estar tremendamente interesante. Si ustedes, o sea, los residentes y también médicos que no son miembros de la EAMS, pero son de unos países como de Latinoamérica, pueden acceder de manera online al Congreso con una pequeña inscripción que está disponible en la página web del Congreso EAC 2022. Y por último, quiero anunciarles que el próximo sábado 29 de octubre vamos a tener al doctor Nicholas Kleins, de Australia, anestesiólogo australiano, que se hizo mundialmente conocido por el desarrollo del Vortex, que es un sistema para manejo de la vía aérea difícil no anticipada, y también ha sido uno de los líderes en el proyecto Puma, así es que junto con el doctor Sorbello. Así es que los queremos dejar desde ya invitados para esta próxima reunión, en nuestro próximo webinario, en que el doctor Crimes va a hablar sobre efectivamente las nuevas guías universales del manejo de la vía aérea. Así es que los esperamos. Por favor, difundan esta información que es siempre relevante y que contribuye, como la de hoy día con el doctor Sorbello, a mejorar nuestro desempeño y ofrecer un manejo de calidad y seguridad a nuestros pacientes. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Un gran abrazo.
Gracias, profesor.
Ya dejamos.